This week on Wealth Track, how to make sure your portfolio stays alive as long as you do. Kiplinger's insurance expert Kim Langford and New York Life's retirement income security chief Chris Blunt share strategies to ensure you don't run out of money in retirement. Next on Consuelo Mack Wealth Track.
The company you keep is also the company we keep. Together, we help provide a lifetime of guaranteed income and investment solutions.
Additional funding provided by Loomis Sales, investors seeking exceptional opportunities globally. Research affiliates, an efficient index for an inefficient market. Wintergreen, your home for global value. And Rosalind P. Walter.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Wealth Track. I'm Consuelo Mack. They say nothing is certain but death and taxes. What they don't say is that for retirees, the greatest uncertainty is the date of death. And the greatest fear is running out of money before that final earthly departure. And therein lies the biggest challenge for retirees. In insurance industry parlance, it's known as longevity risk. As this chart shows, a healthy 65-year-old man has a 75% probability of living to 78, a woman to 81. A healthy 65-year-old man has a 50% chance of making it to 85, the woman to 88. And the odds decrease to 25% for making it to 92 for a man and 94 for a woman. But guess what? No one knows who is going to be in that lucky 25% living well into their 90s and beyond. Now, until now, the solution to longevity risk was to limit withdrawals from retirement plans to around 4% annually, the magic number that was supposed to protect a principal drawdown to zero before a client's time. Well, it turns out that formula has some flaws. Many retirees find they can't live on 4% withdrawal rates. That's $40,000 on $1 million portfolio before taxes. Being a millionaire never felt so poor. Many financial plans didn't take into account a market decline of 50% in a given year, or the meager level of income options from record low interest rates to historically low dividend yields, to a decade of negative returns in a major market index like the S&P 500. Then there are the new realities of retirement. Employees, not employers, are now responsible for increasing amounts of their retirement funds, with the possibility of less support from traditional sources of guaranteed income, such as pensions, Medicare, and Social Security. It is a scary responsibility. Only 39% of employees are confident in their ability to make the right financial decisions. And according to Fidelity Investments, 75% of pre-retirees do not have a formal retirement plan in place. Now, to fill in the gaps, firms such as Fidelity are increasingly looking beyond the traditional IRA and 401k mix of stocks, bonds, and cash to guaranteed income products from life insurance companies. The reason, as this chart illustrates, over the years, income annuities can deliver higher payouts than other investments because in addition to distributing interest and premium, insurance companies pay mortality credits, subsidizing those who live longer with the capital of those who die early. How can you manage the great unknown called longevity risk? Well, we asked two retirement planning pros to join us. Kim Langford is a contributing editor and columnist for Kiplinger's Personal Finance magazine and author of several books, including The Insurance Maze, How You Can Save Money on Insurance and Still Get the Coverage You Need. Christopher Blunt is Executive Vice President of Retirement Income Security at New York Life, where he oversees income annuities, investment annuities, and mutual funds. New York Life is a Wealth Track sponsor, but Chris is here on his own merit as an acknowledged pro in the retirement field. I began by asking them for advice on handling the risk of running out of money.
Well, I think a key thing is to look at your cash flow through retirement and look at what your expenses are and look at what sources of guaranteed income, if any, you have coming in. And then you really need to focus on the difference between those two and how you're going to fill in those gaps. And knowing that those gaps could keep going on well beyond average life expectancy. I mean, average life expectancy is mid-80s for men and women, and you could live 10, 15 years longer than that.
So, Chris, both of you advise individuals through various means. So from an individual's point of view, emotionally, what do we need to know about the fact that we might live longer than we think? How do we factor that into our planning?
No, it's difficult, and I think this is one of the great risks that retirees face today. There's a myriad of risks, but this is a big one. And the reality is the lifespans have increased so much faster than folks, I think, had ever anticipated. You know, when Social Security was created, the average life expectancy was about 67. So paying you a pension at 65 wasn't a big risk for the federal government to do that. You know, today it's now 85, 88, depending on your gender. And so this is a huge issue, and it really messes with the math, frankly, of someone trying to figure out how much is enough. You know, whatever that number was in the past, if it's now got to carry you 20, 25 years into retirement, it needs to be a big number.
Why is it so essential to supplement Social Security? I mean, what's wrong with the old mix of stocks, bonds, and cash? And that's going to get me through. Kim?
Because those expenses are going to continue for the rest of your life. And if Social Security is only filling a very small piece of that gap between your expenses and what you have, then you really need to think of filling that in yourselves. And you really need to not just look at a portfolio that, you know, maybe I can be conservative and think, oh, maybe I'll live to the late 80s. You don't know how long you're going to live, and you don't want to find that out in your late 80s that you don't have enough money. So that's where it's good to look for another source of guaranteed income.
So, Chris, from an insurance person's point of view, this is music to your ears
Yeah,
to hear this because this is your business. But again, to answer that question of why doesn't my traditional stock, bond, and cash mix work anymore, what is it that an insurance product, for instance, can bring to the table that you cannot get from a traditional investment advisor, for instance?
Sure. I think there's a couple of things. One is mathematical, and the other is really emotional. I think to the mathematical, what you can't tell me today is the day you're going to die. And so it's hard for me to optimize a portfolio. To Kim's point, if you told me I'm going to live until I'm 81, I could build you a fabulous portfolio that will spend down until your 81st birthday. But I probably have to build it assuming you could be 95 today. And that factors in a lot of inefficiencies. So I think where risk pooling and insurance products come in, you can actually put products like an immediate annuity in your portfolio that can pay out through life expectancy. And the reality is the risk of you living beyond that is borne by the insurance company. I think the emotional factor is more some of what Kim was alluding to, which is, you know, if you know you have expenses that are going to last forever, food, rent, heat, medical insurance premiums, that's a big one today, you really need to match it up with a guaranteed lifetime income stream. You know, it's one thing if my portfolio doesn't fare well and maybe I can't buy as many kids for the, you know, toys for the grandkids. It's another one if I'm getting, you know, evicted from my house or my apartment.
So, Chris, if I look at my traditional portfolio, where does the annuity fit in? Am I taking money out of cash, stocks, bonds? How should I think of an annuity?
Yeah, great question. And you know, one, we have to be careful with different types of annuities. So what I'm going to talk about now would be the traditional income annuity,
right,
guaranteed lifetime income annuity. And there, it's really a fixed income substitute. So it's typically coming out of your bond portion of your portfolio. And it's interesting, you know, if you look at the research, this is one of those rare free lunches in our business, meaning if you take some of that bond allocation and use an income annuity instead, which has a lot of fixed income characteristics, but also brings this longevity protection, you get this odd result of you're not only reducing risk, meaning your odds of running out of money go down. The really ironic piece of this is your terminal value, meaning the likely amount of money you still have left at life expectancy, is actually higher. And it's incredibly counterintuitive to people, but the reason is the income efficiency and the power of this risk pooling. The reality is, you know, you are being subsidized as you live longer. Your income is being enhanced by all of the people who died prior to life expectancy. It's really the, you know, it's really the whole value proposition of insurance companies is the value of risk pooling.
So that what you call the mortality credit then kicks in as you get older, as you outlive the rest of the pool. In other words, you're the beneficiary. Is that right? And that's where you get that income for the rest of your life.
Exactly right. If you think about it, it's the reverse of life insurance. Life insurance, you write a bunch of little checks throughout your lifetime, and then if you pass away prematurely, you get this large check from the insurance company. This is the opposite. You're giving a check to the insurance company up front for a series of checks, but really what you're protecting against is living too long, not living too short.
You know, so Chris mentioned the fixed immediate annuities, but there's another annuity which has a growth component attached to it, which is a variable annuity. And I told you this over the phone, Kim, at one point, that there have been some articles written about variable annuities that just saying kind of the worst thing that's possibly ever happened to seniors. So there's a tremendous amount of criticism and concern about variable annuities. Tell me about, number one, what a variable annuity is, and also, you know, what's a good one versus a bad one?
Well, and that's the thing. There's a huge range from good to bad in variable annuities, huge range in the guarantees they're providing, and a huge range in fees. So you need to be very, very careful, first of all, to make sure it fits within your portfolio the right way, not being oversold, which is the criticism that some have had, but also to make sure that you're getting one that has decent fees for a decent guarantee. And that's been harder to get because some of the ratings agencies have been a bit concerned about some of these guarantees. And so a lot of the fees for them have gone up a bit. But just to let you know how it works. So these are very attractive for people who are in their late 50s, early 60s, may not be ready to retire quite yet, but they saw what happened in 2008 and they don't want that to happen right before they start making their withdrawals. So they want to do what they can to lock in some kind of guaranteed income now, but still be able to participate in the market. And so many of these have a guarantee that the value of this guaranteed pot will increase by maybe 6% per year, and then you're able to withdraw a certain amount every year for the rest of your life, no matter how long you live. And what they're interested in is if the value of their investments goes up, a lot of these bump up in value then. So you still get that market participation, but you still have a guarantee. But the key thing is you really do need to be very careful with fees. You don't want to put all of your money in this because the fees are quite large. So you want to, once again, look at that income and how much of that income you need to provide and count backwards.
So Chris, what's your take and what's your assessment of variable annuities versus a fixed annuity?
Well, I think Kim said a lot of very important things, which is one, it's not the vehicle. Typically, a lot of the bad press has been about maybe misuse of the vehicle or a lack of understanding. So I think the first thing is, you know, can you understand it? You know, because these are complex products. Some of them are infinitely more complex than others.
Well, so are there understandable variable annuities that don't come with a 900-page prospectus?
I think we're starting to see more of that. I think there has been a move towards simplification of product. I would also say that this is, you know, a plug for advice. I mean, the reality is these are a little more challenging than wading through, you know, returns on an index mutual fund, for example. And so I do think it's important to have an advisor that you trust and someone who understands that the right answer for everybody is probably not a product. It's probably a slew of products, but it's really a process. It's who's helping you sort through how these products all work together. So I would say variable annuities, there's a place for them. I particularly think in this transitionary phase of, you know, while it may not be the uber efficient income vehicle, nor is it a pure growth vehicle, there is something in that transition phase where it can play a valuable role. But the key is really, do you understand how it works, and do you understand it, most importantly, in the context of your overall portfolio?
So let's talk about how to put a portfolio together and you know where these different vehicles fit in. So the fixed immediate annuity, Chris, which New York Life specializes in. So you know, who is that appropriate for? You know, when do you buy one? And again, what role does it fulfill in your portfolio?
Yeah, I think of it, if you had a spectrum of, you know, growth over here and income over here, it's once again kind of the ultimate income vehicle. So it's really for someone that says, you know, I need income and I need it now. You know, I want to maximize my income because it's a very efficient income vehicle. You know, the trade-off for that is, you know, you're not going to have the liquidity that you're going to have in other, you know, in other products. So typical buyer for this we find is someone probably in their mid-60s, sweet spot in their 70s. And that's where, once again, these mortality credits kick in and the payout rates get incredibly attractive, where it almost becomes for the client and the advisor, why wouldn't I do some of this? You know, if your alternative is you can have an 8% return for as long as you live, well, you'd need to work pretty hard to come up with a portfolio where you could say to someone, you can withdraw 8% without an undue risk of outliving your assets.
Now, the other interesting thing is, you know, we talked about that there's a lot of research, and academics have been saying, you know, that annuities should be used by more people for a long time, and no one really listened to them. But tell me about the research that you need to have, what, 30 or 40% more saved if you don't have an annuity? How does that work?
Wharton had done some research, and I think the Wall Street Journal had picked up on this, and the whole point, once again, back to this risk pooling benefit, was their conclusion was for 25 to 40% fewer assets, tying up fewer assets, you can generate the same level of income guaranteed for life. And so I think that's important, not only because of the income piece, but basically that's where this weird finding of how did you end up with more money? Typically when you reduce your risk, you end up with less money. Well, it's because you're tying up fewer assets to generate that amount of income. You've got more assets available for growth.
Well, that's where it's important to put it all into context of an overall portfolio, because the downside is you're not going to be able to pass any of that money onto your heirs. I mean, you could have a joint annuity with your spouse or someone else, but that's going to lower the payout. So to maximize the payouts, you're going to have a single life annuity, and then you need to have other money that's going to accomplish those other goals. So you need to kind of look at it in different pieces, putting it together as an overall portfolio, and not saying, well, this is all of my money here, and unfortunately, I'm afraid to do this because I won't have anything to pass on. Well, if you have a little piece of your money in this, that that's guaranteed, then some of the rest of your portfolio can be, for money to your heirs, money for your emergencies or other expenses, things like that. Another key thing for people to keep in mind is inflation. The standard fixed annuities don't increase the payouts through the years, and in order to get the highest payout, it's going to remain the same forever, which is both a blessing and a curse. I mean, on one side, you know exactly what you're going to be getting, but on the other side, through the years, that purchasing power is going to go down. So you need to have other money set aside to help be able to fill in those gaps through the years. Or you could also get a fixed immediate annuity that has inflation adjustment, which the academics love those. But people, when it comes to buying it, they don't buy them as often because they generally start with a 25 to 30% lower payout at the beginning, and it's the longer you live beyond life expectancy, the further you come out ahead. So either way, whether you're going to do it through an inflation-adjusted annuity or through that other pot of money, somehow you really need to think about how you're going to deal with inflation.
So is there any question in your mind, Kim, that basically every retiree, unless you're extremely wealthy, should not have some sort of an annuity? And I can't ask Chris this question because well,
I mean, I think that you need to do that calculation yourself, looking at the expenses and matching that up with your sources of income. Because if you do have a valuable pension and you do have Social Security coming in, maybe that meets all of your needs. You need to have some kind of income that's going to come in to match up with those expenses. People who don't have a pension, that's where it becomes very valuable. People who have a pension that is not going to cover a lot of their bills, that's where it becomes very valuable. So you need some sort of lifetime income. It could come from an annuity, it could come from a pension or Social Security, but you need to match those two things up.
So there's another piece to this as well, and it's called longevity insurance. So Krista, tell us what longevity insurance is, and then we'll figure out whether or not that's another thing that we need to add to our planning.
And I guess just to surprise you, I don't think this is an end-all be-all for anyone. There's no one
longevity
perfect
insurance
product, or just even immediate annuities aren't perfect for everyone. There are folks who, either because of the level of their assets, frankly, don't have a need to annuitize, or some it's more psychological, frankly. So. But yeah, I think longevity insurance has really taken out, one level beyond it, maybe call it the graduate course of guaranteed lifetime income, where instead of the payments starting today, they would actually start at your life expectancy. So I'll take a simple example. A 65-year-old puts money in the contract with the understanding being that the income will not kick in until, say, their 85th birthday. Now, the beauty of that is tremendous leverage. So a lot of income can be generated with a small amount of premium. But what it really does for the financial planner is, once again, answer that question we couldn't answer before, which is, when are you going to die? Now, we don't really know when you're going to die, but through risk pooling, we can assume that all you have to do is build a portfolio to take you through your 85th birthday, because at age 85, the insurance company is going to kick in, the longevity insurance is going to kick in. I think what is challenging about this is, now this is pure insurance, meaning the downside is you could put $100,000 in this, if you die on your 83rd birthday, well, frankly, it was wasted, but, as was your car insurance when you didn't have an accident, and your home insurance. But it's, I think, the academics love it. I think some advanced financial planners love it because, once again, it gives you that leverage of taking that longevity risk off the table with one single investment.
So at 65, is that right, Kim? Is that when we really should seriously consider longevity insurance, something that we don't know if we're going to take advantage of, or that if we do, it's not going to happen until we're 85? I mean, again, I can see where that's a hard sell.
Yeah.
Yep.
It is. But when you look at the numbers, I mean, this is where, as Chris mentioned, the academics love this because you look at the numbers. I mean, it is incredibly efficient. I mean, if you invest about $50,000 at 65, when you're 85, if you live that long, it could take just about a year and a half to make up for that money you originally invested. And everything beyond that is in addition. But the other thing that it does is, as he mentioned too, is it really helps you understand what to do with the rest of that money for that 20 years because you don't have that big unknown. You're not having to build in that big cushion of, well, what happens? What can I do with that money just in case I live too long? Two other things about this that are really, really good timing is at 85, that's when a lot of people end up needing long-term care. And they have some of these big expenses that crop up in their 80s or so. It's great to have some extra money coming in, just a big hunk of extra money coming in at that point. Also, at 85, it's nice not to have to worry about micromanaging all of your investments. As you get older, to know that there's more of a regular income coming in at that time when you're less able to control all of that and manage it just mentally yourself is really good. But it is a hard sell because you really do need to look at it as insurance against living too long rather than the investments. And so you really need to not invest too much in this because it is a risk. But to really look at what this extra big bump up in payout could do for you by then.
So here's the scary part, is that, talking about this, it makes sense, especially given the financial crisis that we've just been through, the fact that so many baby boomers now are facing their retirement and they're not adequately prepared, as we all know from the statistics. But the scary part is that we have just been also through a crisis where we've seen some major financial institutions go bankrupt, have to be bailed out by the government. So how can I be assured that the institution that I'm insuring with is going to be around to pay my longevity insurance in 30 years or whatever?
You need to think about this in the very long term because you are counting on this to pay out for 20 or 30 years.
Right.
And looking at financial strength ratings definitely helps. We saw, they're not perfect, but it's at least a really good step. And as he said, the laboratory of 2008 was very interesting to see what happened then. So you can really learn a lot. Because in immediate annuities, generally, you're looking at who's paying out the most. And there's a lot of calculators that help you find out who's paying out the most, but you've got to take that second step. You've got to look beyond it. And a lot of times you'll find out some very strong companies are still paying out very high. So you don't have to sacrifice payout in order to get a strong company, but make sure you've got both of those pieces together.
One investment for a long-term diversified portfolio, what should we all own some of? Chris Blunt.
I'm going to cheat and give you two because I think the power is the combination of the two. Shockingly, one would be a guaranteed lifetime income annuity or an immediate annuity from an insurance company, and we talked about the, building a floor of guaranteed income, peace of mind, et cetera. But I would actually couple that with a portfolio of dividend-paying stocks, and the reason for that is between the two, you get some of that inflation protection that, frankly, you can only get from equities. Some ability to offset some of that inflation risk, a little bit of growth, and the two actually dovetail very nicely together.
You are allowed only this once to give two for the one investment for a long-term diversified portfolio. Kim, what's your recommendation that we should all own something of?
And mine is on the same theme. It is some source of guaranteed lifetime income. And when you're in your working years, maybe it is working with a company that has a pension that you can count on. And be very careful of keeping track of what those vesting requirements are. If you're a year or two before you get vested in it, think very carefully about whether you want to stay there for an extra few years, if given that choice. I know fewer people have that option, but either looking at the pension or looking at it from an immediate annuity or some sort of longevity insurance, but thinking even before you retire about how you're going to get some kind of lifetime income.
And it sounds as if talking to the two of you that you really do need to think in terms of that there are now more pieces to add to your retirement planning. It's not actually getting simpler, it's getting more complicated. Am I correct about that? It's just no longer your grandmother's pension or even your father's pension no longer, and planning no longer does the trick.
Well, I think pension's the right word. I think what we're hearing from consumers is they want their pension back, and the problem is no one wants to give it to them anymore. Their employer can't afford to give it to them. The government can't afford to give them to them anymore, but they can create a pension, but they have to do it themselves, and it's complicated because unlike an accumulation, you're not just dealing with the asset side of the balance sheet. You have to understand the liability side and how they tie together. So I'd agree that I think it's infinitely more complicated.
And the good thing is, though, once you figure out how you can do that, how you can provide some source of lifetime income, then that does make the other part a little easier. You're not always just kind of crossing your fingers, wondering if the rest of that money is going to make it for the rest of your life. You know that you've got a little piece coming in, and then you can manage the rest of that money with a little less stress.
Which is a tremendous relief if you can actually achieve that. So Kim Lankford, so great to have you here from Kiplinger's. Chris Blunt, thank you so much for joining us from New York Life as well.
Great, thank you.
On Wealth Track. One additional recommendation from Kim Lankford was to check out the recently introduced Fidelity Income Strategy Evaluator. Kim says it is very useful in helping individuals understand and personalize their transition from saving to spending for retirement. You can find it at fidelity.com/income strategy, and we will provide a link on our website, wealthtrack.com. And on that note, we're going to conclude this edition of Wealth Track. Next week, two investment pros will discuss investment strategy and asset allocation. BlackRock's chief equity strategist and large cap fund manager Bob Dahl will join Morgan Stanley's chief investment strategist and asset allocation master David Darst. Thank you so much for watching, and make the week ahead a profitable and a productive one.
Additional funding provided by Loomis Sales, investors seeking exceptional opportunities globally, research affiliates, an efficient index for an inefficient market, Wintergreen, your home for global value, and Rosalind P. Walter.